Welcome back, you real estate rock stars. In the previous episodes, we talked about the pre-PSA phase, which is the stage where you're trying to get a property under contract, you're going through the LOI phase, you're getting through the negotiation phase of the PSA, and finally you get the PSA inked up. Today, we're going to look at what happens after you get the PSA inked up. Yes, that's the nitty gritty, the getting to know you phase of the property relationship where you're under due diligence. Once again, once you get your PSA signed, this is a huge milestone because there's a lot of negotiations that happen in order to get the PSA inked up. So once you do get it inked up, congratulations. Big accomplishment there. But I would not celebrate just yet because after you get it signed, this is when you have to actually roll up your sleeves and get to work. Once you get your purchase and sale agreement signed, the first thing I want you to do is get an escrow timeline planned out. This is essentially your roadmap. It's going to outline all of the events and the deadlines that are going to happen throughout the transaction. Think of it as your master plan to keep everything on track. It's going to help you manage tasks like inspections, due diligence, financing arrangements, and other transaction-specific requirements. In your escrow timeline, you're going to have a couple of really important dates that you have to keep in mind. First off, the due diligence start date. This is the date that's going to kick off the timeline that you have in order to get all of your due diligence shit done, like getting all the documents from the seller, getting financing requirements, surveys, all the third-party reports, etc. This is going to highlight that date, and you're going to have X amount of days from that date. You're probably going to have an appraisal deadline, which is the date at which the property's appraisal has to be completed by and or turned in. Next, you're going to have a deadline for environmental reports. Those things take a while as well, in addition to the appraisal, a couple of weeks and whatnot. So you're going to have to put out a timeline for when you need the environmental report done by. You're also going to get a property inspection report. Hopefully you're thinking about getting one because it's not a good idea to go without one. So you're going to have to mark the deadline of when the inspection is going to have to be completed and when you're going to get the reports back. Next, you're going to probably have some financing contingencies in your escrow timeline, and all of your other due diligence items. So you're going to have to highlight the date at which all of these contingencies have to be met by, because if they're not met by this date and you go past this date, your earnest money is going to be non-refundable, or it's going to go hard. You also want to highlight within this escrow timeline the last date for negotiating any changes in the sales price, where you are wanting to go back to the seller and negotiate any final concessions. You might find there are a couple items on the inspection report that are older than expected or needs more money in repairs than expected. So you want to go back and hopefully get a price reduction. Remember to only negotiate the price reduction once. Once again, this is the date you want to highlight within your escrow timeline so that you do not miss it. And lastly, within your escrow timeline, you probably want to highlight the closing date. After you get all of your ducks in a row, you want to put down a date or a tentative date of which you are looking to close on the property after you fulfilled all of your obligations and or requirements. And also, one of the first things you want to do once you get your purchase and sale agreement signed is taking care of Estoppels. I highlighted in a previous episode what Estoppels are. This is a document that you're going to want to line up with your attorney way ahead of time. You're going to want them to draft this well before your purchase and sale agreement has been signed. So, get your attorney on the same page as soon as you can, so that you can get this document. Now, once you've got it, you are ideally going to send it to the broker and or the seller on the day of the purchase and sale agreement signing so that they can get it to their tenants in order for them to sign it. Why do you want to get this done so quickly? Because depending on the property, depending on the type of tenants, they can take a while or a shit ton of time in order to get this done. They might drag their feet. It might take even longer than expected. But in short, estoppels are going to certify the lease terms with each tenant and effectively confirm that everything within the lease is legit. So when you get your estoppels back, you're going to have a small checklist of what to look for. You want to confirm the lease rates, the actual rentable square footage that the tenants are renting in comparison to the rent roll. Check the lease description to make sure that it matches the actual lease. Confirm the rent and the security deposit that they've set in. Confirm the rent that they're currently paying, as well as the security deposit that they initially deposited, and make sure that those amounts match up to the lease. You also want to make sure the rent payment date is accurate. If they're supposed to be paying on the 1st, you should not be seeing payments on the 5th or the 6th. This could highlight discrepancies and or late payments or an issue with collections. Also look at the common area charges. You want to verify that all the charges are up to date and tenants are paying this on a monthly basis or whatever frequency that they're paying, depending upon their lease type. So more commonly, this would be within a net lease. And you also want to make sure that there are no defaults between the landlord and or the tenant. Neither party is in default, because that's going to have some issues in the future. Well, for you, if you're taking over the property. Check to see if there's any unfinished work that's by the landlord. You don't want any incomplete construction, because now if you take over the property, you could be the one liable for the completion of the construction. Also make sure that all the amendments or any addendums and any other agreements are included within the the lease or the estoppel itself. And you also want to check for any lease extensions on the estoppels. Make sure that matches up with the lease, and if there's not, you want to figure out why the discrepancy is there. And also, lastly, check to see if there's any purchase options that these tenants have. Sometimes these landlords or sellers, owners, will enter into like a rent-to-own agreement with a tenant without letting you know of that information. And I have a value tip for you guys. When you do estoppel certificates, or estoppels for short, make sure you attach a copy of the lease as an exhibit to the estoppel before the tenant signs it. And don't forget, you also want to have the lease guarantors sign the estoppels as well. And that's a wrap up for today. Remember, once a property looks good and you got a signed PSA, this is your time to dig deep. When you go into due diligence, it's going to require you getting your hands dirty. You're going to spend a lot of time on this, a lot of digging, in order to understand the property in its full scope. It's a super important step here. You want to follow your escrow timeline. Those dates are super important. You got to be organized here so that you do not miss a date or a deadline. And you also want to double check everything that's on the estoppels. And this is just part 1 of the due diligence. I will catch you guys next week.